What's happening, folks? Back with another reaction, back with some more Bad Religion. And we're going to go to Process of Belief 2002. This was a request from Sophia, who's been checking out some of the Bad Religion songs and earlier reactions. And this one is The Defense. It's a song that, like, in the moment, if you started singing some of the lines, I would immediately know what song you were talking about, but I would not necessarily remember the name. Which is to say, some of the songs from the post-2000 era I just haven't listened to quite as many times as the stuff from the late 80s, early 90s, which I listened to endlessly as a teenager. So those are fully ingrained, whereas tunes of the last 20 or so years from Bad Religion, I certainly know, but sometimes they don't immediately come back to me in terms of what the name is or what album it's on. And in fact, I've talked recently about New Maps of Hell. Songs from that album and songs from The Empire Strikes First, I often confuse. I thought Atheist Peace was also on New Maps of Hell. It turns out it's on Empire Strikes First. So again, I know these tunes, but they have not been as clearly sorted and categorized in my brain as the earlier Bad Religion material. In any case, this tune I think is very well written. In the moment, I'm forgetting if it's a Brett or a Greg tune, but that's the point. This album, though I don't necessarily rate it among the very best Bad Religion albums, is arguably, if not the most important Bad Religion album. It certainly is a contender for that, given that it's when Brett came back into the fold and the band went back to their original Epitaph home, meaning in the second half of the 90s, Brett had left the group, and I've talked about this before. There were a variety of reasons. He was focusing on the label Epitaph, which had blown up largely because of The Offspring, who had their massive hit Smash, and that sold more than I think any independent label, certainly in the world of punk, had ever sold before for an album. So he was running the day-to-day operations of a label that went from being relatively obscure and minor player in the larger music universe to suddenly selling as much as some of the major labels because of a particular release. He also was going through some personal issues, and he had had some friction with fellow band member Jay Bentley, but in 2002 he returned not only to songwriting but playing guitar. I think these days he only plays with them when they play in the LA area because, again, he's older now, he has a family, and I think he still is focusing on the label, but he has been songwriting and playing guitar on the albums with them for, right up into the present. And my understanding is they're going to be coming out with a new album, so I don't know the details of that yet, but I'm looking forward to that. But as I said, I enjoy the albums when they're on Atlantic. I think there's some really good tunes. Immediately Parallel from Grey Race comes to mind. But I do think those albums are still not quite what the Epitaph albums were, either before then or after them, and Brett not being there to sort of compete with Greg in terms of songwriting. They've talked about it before. They were always trying to write better songs than each other in the early days, and I think that friendly competition made for some brilliant songwriting, exceeding pretty much any other band in punk rock. And that's not to knock the lyrics of a lot of other bands I like, Subhumans, Dead Kennedys, Propagandhi, and so on. But as I said, I think Bad Religion is maybe the best songwriting in the punk world, and part of it was because Brett and Greg were always trying to outdo each other. And I think that friendly competition begins to become clear again when you go to this album, Process of Belief, where Brett came back, and then certainly the next couple after this, Empire Strikes First and New Maps of Hell. In any case, not knowing who wrote this one is not all that important. I will just say that it's a very nuanced song because it speaks to feelings of being overwhelmed by the power of states, meaning, governments of countries, the power of dogmatic cultural, religious, and social institutions, which people often fall into when they're feeling overwhelmed by other forces that they can't control, and they want to feel part of something bigger, even if that means clouding out disconfirming evidence and ignoring things that may go against your worldview. And I think the song, I'm not sure, I'm going to guess Brett for some reason, but whoever wrote it is basically saying that sometimes we fall into that same trap, but he's not going to give up, and he's not going to give in to these large and powerful forces, even if he needs to lean on some of them as an anchor, and that might be, forces of resistance, or the idea of being in the minority and having a dissident view is itself perhaps a community and somewhere where you can feel you belong and you're part of something bigger, even if you're pushing back against even bigger forces that try to bring in as many people as possible and can be very dogmatic with the way they see things. So it's a song that criticizes large-scale governmental forces and censorship. I think it even makes reference to the Pentagon, sort of curtailing information and, filtering it through the lens that they want the American public to see things. It talks about maybe misinformation through a glut of choices, meaning it talks about 1,000 cable channels, but there's nothing on that you want to watch, and there's so much choice and variety out there that even shows or programming that might speak to genuine issues in people's lives and maybe finding different ways of living and organizing society, they get drowned out with all the other things, all the sitcoms, all the pop music videos. And again, there's nothing wrong with sitcoms or pop music videos. I enjoy many of both. But I think there's an idea that in the information age, there's so much fluff and trite material and misinformation and disinformation that good information gets sort of buried in the avalanche of other choices. And so again, I think the writer is saying that there's so much out there that we feel is bigger than us, overwhelming and impossible to stop, that we end up sort of linking ourselves to other anchors as a way to feel part of something, but he's not going to give up, he's not going to give in, and he's not just going to be a passive observer in this milieu of information, of disinformation, of censorship, and so on. So again, it's a complicated tune. I think there's others who might interpret some of the lines differently, but that's the way that I've always took this. And there's a series of call and response refrains that constitute the chorus. There's a couple versions of the chorus that are the same, but I think by the end we get a couple different versions of the chorus. But one refrain, call and response, always comes back to me, that isn't it great to be alive? And then the call back comes, yeah, right. So it's a more pessimistic song, and in some regards I would say maybe that makes it more likely to be a Greg tune, but for whatever reason I'm going to guess this was a Brett tune. I'll try to look it up before I post this video, and I'll indicate if I can find out clearly in the video description. In any case, let's give it a listen. This is Bad Religion from Process of Belief, and the tune is called The Defense.
Connections monitored daily by the Pentagon. These things are seldom what they seem. I'm not inclined to enjoy my dream. Won't go away. No peace, no friends. We trace the mortal edge. Distant the obvious. This world is perilous for us. No sense and no God. Ain't it beautiful to be alive? I won't resign before the struggle ends. So I'll construct everybody safe. We were all made in the shade. And your mother's in the kitchen, where she's patching all the cracks in the wall. We never had a care in the world. Too much to sacrifice, it's hard to recognize. Trying to compromise a fury, deadly alibis. Combination of the pressure so intense, so I'll construct a sound defense. Nothing greater than the madness in the world today. I must conceal myself and steal myself and break away. I see condition in the matters that are black and white, so I'll construct a sound defense.
Brilliant. So it's definitely a slower tune in their catalog. It's by no means objectively slow, and it goes into that double time rhythm, which, is basically within a standard punk rock tempo range. But I do think of it with some of their other slower songs, and songs which have a less, what's the right word, like West Coast hardcore, which is a phrase largely associated with Bad Religion and some other bands that emerged in the years following that, who were out here on the West Coast and playing a style of hardcore punk, but one that was more melodic and less rough compared to East Coast hardcore, like Bad Brains or Minor Threat and some bands that were famous on the other coast of the US. But yes, it definitely has a bit slower sound compared to a lot of their other tunes. It has wicked guitar work, not only that ending flourish, that solo near the end, which I think is really great, but those little flourishes along the way almost have like this Eastern vibe, a bit mystical sounding, so it has a bit different of a feel atmospherically than a number of other Bad Religion tunes. As I said, I think the lyrics are up for interpretation, and maybe part of why I'm guessing it's a Brett song is because he often has these lines that seemingly must be allegorical, metaphorical, and those lines at the end about mothers in the kitchen, what is it, papering over the cracks in the wall, something like that. We never had a care in the world. Of course, that could speak to growing up comfortable, that the world made sense, and you had a certain set of beliefs that were largely passed down to you by your parents, and they're taking care of everything, and any problems are quickly papered over, and everything still seems nice and harmonious. And then you get to be an adult, and you find out that by and large adults have been winging it too, and maybe holding on to beliefs that aren't really logical or based in empirical fact, but provide a nice story that give us purpose and a sense of what we're doing. And maybe they were basically reaching for these anchors and these defenses against the overflow and the onslaught of the cacophony of information and brutality of human affairs. And that line about, culture is the predator and we're the prey, these cultural forces that have a lot of gravity, whether they're religions or social movements, more benign or otherwise, or governmental forces, they draw people and lives and parts of society into their orbit because of that gravity. So I think there's a lot of clever philosophical and allegorical writing in the tune. Now, of course, Greg is well capable of that too, but a lot of Greg's songs, they come after their targets, I think, a bit more overtly and directly. So let me see, I did open up Discogs, because I was trying to remember if the album was 2001 or 2002. It is 2002. Do we have songwriting credits? We have, mixing credits, producer credits, written by, it seems to say, at least on this page, which is for the specific CD release that I have, that everything is written by Brett and Greg. So perhaps that means they collaborated on nearly all the tunes, but I wonder about that. I'm not seeing anything more specific. Let's see here. Oh, it was written by Brett, at least according to the site genius.com, which has archives of songs and albums, and sometimes has additional information. And at least according to the metadata here, it says the defense was indeed written by Brett, which, as I said, I wouldn't necessarily be surprised that either of them had written it, but it does feel a bit more like a Brett song, and at least according to this, that is the case. In any case, do let me know what you think. I'm looking forward to the new album. As I said, I have very few details, but Ryan had mentioned to me that there's another one coming. The Age of Unreason, was that 2018? It feels like it was actually quite a little while ago. It felt new for the first couple of years after that. Anytime a new album comes out, it feels like it's been so recent and for the first couple of years, but now it's been several. So I'm very much looking forward to that. Hopefully you are too. Let me know what you think, and I will see you next time. Peace.